I want to ask you, Max.
Yes.
You're the son of refugees. You're an ethnic minority within Australia as the son of refugees. You're a religious minority within your ethnic minority.
Yes.
You're also a religious minority within the halls of political power in this land.
I am.
So do you think that your unique insight into the minority experience gives you, or I guess what kind of unique insight does your minority experience give you into that hunt for validation?
You're right, I'm certainly minority. All I need to do is be holding a Pepsi and a Huawei phone and I'd be the ultimate minority, I think. I think, look, it has given me unique insights, but I think everyone, wherever they come from and whatever they come through culturally and experientially, has equally unique insights. Just because people are so different and every story is so different. And I think the nature of Australian society hasn't been homogeneous for a long, long time. So for me, it's certainly given me some insights into that whole first generation refugee thing. So I think the most helpful thing I've had, certainly living in Singapore now and being able to travel back here, is that insight into both the Eastern and the Western cultural paradigms. The honour-shame thing and the guilt, innocence, morality, pleasure-seeking thing. So to be able to get exposure to both of those and some insight to both of those has been helpful, I think.
Yeah, cool. Lisa, relationships are really tricky in general, and as both of you have mentioned, we often disappoint ourselves because we aren't the people that we want to be within our relationships. Can you just expand a little bit on some concrete kind of pointers of what we can do in order to help improve our relationships in general?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. Well, I think what I said in my talk really is it's about focusing on yourself. It sounds really counterintuitive, doesn't it? You think that if it's about relationships, it's going to be about the other and about the interaction. But the firmer that you hold on to your own, if who you want to be, hopefully your values are heading in a good direction, that you want to be patient, that you want to be forgiving, that you want to be kind. And as long as they're heading in that direction, that you're pursuing that, is going to be really helpful. I think it involves vast amounts of, our jargony word is self-soothing, calming yourself to think about how to do relationships well. I could talk for another hour about this, but I'm sure you don't want me to.
Well, I want to get to some of these questions. Keep them coming in. There's some really interesting ones here. I'm happy with my synthetic value. This is quoted directly. I have family and friends and work which all share the same values. Can you make a case as to why I should look elsewhere? So it sounds as though people are pretty happy with what they've got. Why should they look elsewhere?
Absolutely. It's a really good point and a really good question. I think, well, the first thing to say is that all those things that you have are wonderful things. They're all good things. But my firm view from the bottom of my heart to my brain to my experience is that for those who might not be Christian in the room, as good as those things are, God has something even better, through which those things, the value and the enjoyment of those, will be magnified as well. So what I'm talking about when I speak as a Christian, is something far more than happiness. C.S. Lewis, a follower of Jesus, famously said, if it was just about happiness, all I would need would be a fireplace and a good bottle of scotch. I totally agree with him. But what the Christian view is about, what the Christian message and the Christian offering is about, far, far more than happiness as we would define it. The line that he goes on to use in his book is, we often spend so long enjoying making mud pies in the backyard that we negate the possibility of a holiday at the beach. And so while life probably is wonderful, might seem wonderful, and it is wonderful, there's even more. There's even more out there. So that's one point. The second point, which I think is the best reason to become a Christian, is because it's true. And that, I think, is something that is worth investigating if that's not your current view. Because if it's not true, then it's all irrelevant. You're better off finding the scotch and anything else that just makes you happy. But if it's true, then it has huge implications. Yes, in the next life, but in this one too. Huge implications, huge levels of significance. And I think the evidence base for the truth value of the Christian worldview is much more powerful than anyone that hasn't investigated would imagine. It certainly has been for me. And as Lisa correctly says, often the data and the Bible, fit quite perfectly. There's probably a reason for that.
If you want to respond, if that was your question, and you want to respond, please do send in another question as well. Lisa, let's talk about what Max just brought up, that there is some sort of weird correspondence going on in what you're reading in the Bible, but also some of the findings on well-being. You mentioned how, when it comes to hope, the correlation between Christian faith and actively chosen Christian faith, not just simply you're there because you're there, and well-being is actually quite high. What's going on there?
I think hope's a big concept, isn't it? It's got lots of facets to it. And I take it as part of my research. I've been looking at hope having 3 aspects. So one is that you have to look into the future and see that there's multiple possibilities in the future. And I think a Christian worldview, not all worldviews have that. Some worldviews are quite cyclical, that the future doesn't necessarily involve change, for example. But a Christian worldview does involve possibilities of change in the future. I think hope also involves a sense of agency. So that's what differentiates hope from optimism. If you're optimistic, you just think the future's going to be fine. If you hope for something, you will act. You'll have an agency in bringing it about. Now, classically in psychology, the agency has just been the self. So the classic view of hope in psychology has been the Matt Damon view. It's all about, I'm good at solving problems and I can do this into the future. Whereas I think what actually corresponds more with people's hope is a sense of external agency. Do you have others in your life, either people or God, hence the spiritual aspect, who can help you bring about what you hope for? And lastly, we need a glimpse of what we're hoping for in order to, do you know that little taste that you hope for something, you can just taste it, you can experience a touch of it. And I love, this is such a huge theme in Christian spirituality, this idea that what we get now in this world are little glimpses of what God's got in plan for us in the future. But they're not enough. They're not enough to satisfy, that we hope for something even bigger and better. And the glimpses are great, as we've been saying, but there's actually something bigger and better. And I think that sense of expansion really means that correlation between Christian faith and hope is very strong.
Okay, another question that sort of flows out from that. Do I have to have a faith to feel validated? Is faith the missing link here? Like what? What if people don't have it? Any thoughts? Max, feel free to jump in as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think, for me, how I understand faith, at least in a logical and philosophical context, is faith is belief in something that you can't deductively prove. And so my view is everyone's got one of those. Even if you're an agnostic and you don't know, you can't deductively prove that it's impossible to know. If you're an atheist, you can't deductively prove that God doesn't exist. If you're a Christian, you can't deductively prove that he does. So I think everyone's got a faith of some type. I'll take the question in the context of, without a spiritual faith in the supernatural, can I be validated? Can I be validated, or can I have value?
Do I need a faith to feel validated?
To feel validated.
Yeah.
So my personal view is, of course you can. Of course you can, because there are lots of sources of validation out there. Anywhere and everywhere. I'm sure you'd find it within yourself, in your family, in your workplace. In countries like Australia and cities like Sydney and rooms like this, people are intelligent, well-educated, functioning, driven people. The question is there a deeper, more intrinsic, more enduring, more stable source of validation for you that isn't subject to the vicissitudes of this world, of the closed system? So that can't be taken away by something like a change in government, a change in policy, a cancer diagnosis, a political revolution, a natural disaster. The danger with building and attaching our sense of our value and our validation to things inside this world is then our sense of ourselves become necessarily as vulnerable as things inside this world. So I think that's a real question. I think that's why the Bible, quite powerfully, Jesus himself said, just be very careful, don't build up for yourself treasures here on earth where moth and rust consume and thieves break in and steal. If we do so, then we're at risk of the house of cards kind of falling down.
Okay, our questioner is back. They write, can I push back to Max? What does more than happiness, or this more than, look like? Can you please explain more?
Sure. I'd love to speak afterwards, by the way. But very, very, very briefly, what the Christian message offers is that really deep sense of fulfillment and fulfillment of purpose. So according to the Christian worldview, we were made primarily, there's different ways of putting this, but primarily for two reasons: to be in loving relationship with God and to be in loving relationship with each other. And until and unless the first happens, there's going to be a need for fulfillment that remains in us. Blaise Pascal, the French mathematician, called it a God-shaped hole inside everyone. So when I say there's something more, that God-shaped hole will be filled by the only thing that can correctly and holistically fill it, which is God himself. And until, certainly in my view and in my experience, until and unless that happens, you don't fully have that sense of who you are and who you were made to be by God. So in the same way that you would never take your iPhone to Samsung or the dishwasher repairman to fix it, you take it to Apple. You take it to Apple Care. If you can afford it, you take it to Apple Care. And why would you do that? You do that because Apple created the phone. The creator of the phone knows how the phone functions best. It knows how to optimize the functioning of the phone, from the battery to the screen resolution to the apps to everything. The creator knows best. So the first question is there a creator? Is there someone out there? So I'd encourage you to investigate that. Investigate the evidence for that. If that is then the case, then it would make sense that he or she or it would know better than we would know about how we flourish best. So the Christian worldview is not just a way to heaven. It's not just a second chance. It's not just restoration, though it is all of those things. It's also a blueprint for human flourishing from the creator of humankind, if it's true. So I encourage you to investigate that.
Actually, let's put you up for this.
Sure.
So, Max, what do you think is one of the best indications of the truth value of Christianity?
Wow. So I really think we should hear from Lisa after this as well. I think there are plenty. I'm an apologist, and so I speak on this stuff quite regularly, but there are, in every category of evidence that you could subject a worldview to, in my view, the Christian faith stands up pretty strong or unparalleled. So I think there is strong philosophical evidence. I think there is historical evidence. There is archaeological evidence, anthropological evidence. As I'm sure Lisa would attest to, there is psychological evidence. In my personal story, there is experiential evidence. We have eyewitness evidence. We have documentary and textual evidence. And you could submit all of those things to the same evidential tests, thresholds, burdens of proofs and standards of proofs as you could submit any other worldview to, and I think you would be surprised. I certainly was when I was sceptical, seeking and uncertain, and when parts of me didn't want it to be true, but I was genuinely curious as to whether it might be. I was surprised and stood incorrect on both fronts.
Cool. Okay. So, Lisa, what are some mental habits to stop emotional fusion? Just remind us what emotional fusion is as well.
Yeah, so emotional fusion is where you've sort of lost the boundary between you and someone else. So, look, inevitably you're married for long enough, you end up to a degree emotionally fused. A lot of parents and kids are like that. In psychology we talk about over-functioning and under-functioning as a classic expression of fusion, where you start to actually function for someone else, remind them to do things for them that they're perfectly capable of, which also leaves someone else under functioning. That's a classic sort of fusion expression. It's not exactly a mental habit. I think probably when I'm thinking about myself, I have to pull back and stop and think, hang on, I'm a separate individual here. I am responsible for my own decisions, my own thoughts, my own feelings. Which direction am I heading in? And I think, as we've been saying, whether you're a believer or not a believer, like if you come to a psychologist heading in a direction of values which are echoes of resonances of what the scripture says, you're always actually going to have a better life. So heading in the direction of being loving, being forgiving, being kind is always going to be better, but there are limits, I guess, if you don't have a bigger spiritual framework as to how far you can push that. Yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. It's actually, I call it like it's a healthy self-focus where you're able to just sit and in your own feelings and tolerate someone else having difficult feelings and not feel the compulsion to step in and manage.
Let's hear more from you, Lisa. What does good self-speak look like for you, Lisa?
Good self-speak, okay.
You should simulate it as well.
Well, it certainly it fuels you in the direction of who you want to be. We cannot trust that idea of, is this true, in my head? Because as I said, you say something to yourself for long enough and that storyline feels very true. So it's a very pragmatic criteria, really. Like, is this heading me in the direction of who I want to be? And I think some of those other values which we get from the Bible, like, is it heading me in the direction of being humble? Is it actually helping me forgive, or am I fueling resentment because I'm rehearsing what someone else has done to me? Or am I able to let that go? One of the things I ask myself a lot, this is a classic Bowen Family Systems question, is in a relationship, what is the other person up against in being in a relationship with me? If I'm starting to get frustrated and resentful, gosh, they've got to live with me. Hello, Michael, my husband's out there. With my kids, it's been lots of self-talk about they're young adults now, but certainly when they were teenagers, I need to be the adult. I need to stay calm. I need to think. You know, there's a lot of research which shows that as our stress increases and our amygdala, you know, your limbic brain gets activated. If it's my thumbnail here, so your frontal lobe actually goes offline. Now, all my lovely, calm, big picture thinking about who I want to be is here. And it's going offline as I'm getting stressed. And we have to work really hard in difficult relationships to think and to... it doesn't come naturally to do that deep channeling about what direction am I heading.
Actually, if I'm not technically supposed to ask my own questions, but I would have texted this in anyway. But Lisa, you've been talking about the self that I want to be, and Max, you've been talking about the self that, like, God has created someone to be. Are we talking about the same kind of person? Like, what if, could it be that someone's desires for who they want to be are absolutely in opposition to the person they were meant to be, so to speak? Thoughts?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I think they, more often than not, that is the case. Certainly has been with me before I was a Christian, and since I've been a Christian, there are constantly kind of tensions there. The real question is, what's best for me? I think that's the ultimate question. Like, what is best for me? And not just for me, but for my family, for my friends, for the people that rely on me, that I rely on. And so I think it's, and that's why I think Lisa, the points that Lisa made about self-esteem going rogue is so powerful and so insightful, because it's very easy to get to a point which society has been pushing us to get to, which is it's all about me. I just need to be able to decide. And so words like submission are very, very ugly, disgusting words that people will run a mile from. Whereas when we look at flourishing as a concept, it's done best when you do submission thoughtfully and graciously, and you understand the conditions under which you flourish the best. So a goldfish that's just sitting on a table is technically free. It's completely free of all constraints. It has liberty in the purest John Stuart Mill Platonic sense. That fish is free, it's just sitting on a table. But for that fish to flourish, it actually needs certain, what the freedom fighters would consider, constraints. It needs a bowl or an ocean or a river, and it needs water, which is by definition a constraint. So the question is not really how do we shake off any kind of constraint. The question is, how do we make reasonable, sensible, thoughtful decisions for ourselves as to which constraints we can put around ourselves under which we can flourish? I think that's the question.
And I guess as a psychologist, sometimes I work with clients who are Christians, and that question of who I want to be and who does God want me to be are actually heading in the same direction. Not that we can always do it by any stretch, we need a lot of help and get shown a lot of grace, but that is a similar one. Whereas if someone has a different worldview, often we end up going beyond just the what behaviours do I want to show, or even what values, to what are the beliefs about yourself and life that sit underneath these. And we end up having a bit of an exploration, and sometimes people look at those beliefs that are behind their values and end up having to rethink them in the context of therapy. Sometimes they don't want to do that. But yeah, we do end up in a sort of a worldview place.
Besides your beliefs, how do you find validation in life?
You should go first, Lisa.
Ocean skiing, I don't know, paddling. Like I said, it's so multifaceted. It's risky to just to if you're saying apart from beliefs.
Yeah, apart from beliefs,
apart
just
from
yeah,
faith
just
in God.
yeah.
It's very multifaceted, and it's hard to say this apart from relationship with God, but to me, being a Christian is about becoming more fully human. It's about fulfilling my potential. And so in practice, that looks like all sorts of different things. It is about being validated in relationships. It's about exploring the world. It's about being out in nature. There's so many things where, so many aspects of, I guess, what it is to be human that contribute in small pieces to a sense of, I have worth. I'm part of this extraordinary world. I'm part of this community. I'm part of this family.
But it feels as though like you still can't view that question without bringing in elements of your faith. Is that right?
Yeah, I find it really hard to, because to me all those sources of validation are resonances of something much bigger.
Right.
That they're ultimately found in a relationship with God. Yeah.
Max?
Yeah, I certainly can't detach them either, because I definitely believe that God's in everything. Like if He's real, He's in everything, and if I'm doing relationship with Him in the way that I should be, He should be in every aspect of my life. But I think there are certainly things in my life that I do with God, sometimes well, sometimes badly, but they're responsibilities that have been given to me. When I'm actually performing those well and acquitting myself of those responsibilities well, I find some validation in those. So this morning, my wife was out of the house. We have a son, he's 1 year old. It was a very, very tough nappy change. It was like grade 8, grade 9, 9.4 probably. Got it done. I was like, I had to do some self-speak. You're the parent in the home. This is what you have to do.
It's just a poo.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Good sense of competence.
Yeah.
For that. Like,
Got it done. Nailed it. Felt great.
Yeah.
Okay. Lisa, you mentioned the importance of knowing your values. Will any values do? That is it as long as I have something, I'll be okay?
Well, no, it depends which framework we're working in. So as a Christian, clearly no, because if it is true that God is my creator and wants the best for me, as Max has said, it's like going to the apple shop, and my values I will certainly want to be aligning with what he wants. If I'm talking with a client who's not a believer, I personally still think that, we're in a Christian society where I know church attendance and things is declining, but our general worldview is still so informed by a Christian ethic. So most people, even if they're not Christians, will still say they want to be loving and they want to be kind and they want to be forgiving and humble, without realising that so many of these are actually borrowed from the Christian faith. And so heading in that direction, even if they're not Christians, is still going to be a good thing. Now, you can also look at the data from the psychological research. People who are burdened by deep resentment and anger don't do well in life. So if your value is, no, I'm going to hold on to this resentment because that's just what I want to do. No, it won't. You won't be psychologically healthy. It won't bring you well-being, and it actually won't align you with God's purposes for you. So no, not any values will do. In my practice, though, I find most people actually have very, very sort of Christianised values anyway. And so I can ask that question and be pretty confident that it's going to be okay. No one said, I value being a mass murderer or anything like that yet. It's okay.
Okay, last question. This is the last question of the evening. How do I receive validation from God?
You can answer this one.
You brought it up, Max. This is yours.
I did bring it up. I think there are two aspects of this. One is that regardless of what we believe, as I said when I spoke, everyone's valued by God. Everyone's created in His image. If the Christian message is real, if this is all true, then everyone is created in His image. And so there is a sense of intrinsic worth that every single person has, that you're precious in God's eyes, that He knows you, that He calls you by name. Literally, the Bible tells us that He actually calls you and knows you by name. So that value is there, regardless. But what He wants, what we're created for, is for relationship, for up-close and personal relationship, to do life together, to enjoy that sense of fulfillment and flourishing and joy and peace and a whole lot of other things that come with it. And that's all just on this side of heaven. And so to receive that and to enjoy that, all we have to do is to say yes to that offer of relationship, is to just acknowledge that he is God, is to acknowledge that we have tried to live a life without him, rejected him, ignored him, whatever it was, but tried to be the God of our own life, and that we're willing now to actually say, okay, I'm happy to actually acknowledge and put you in the place that you rightfully deserve to be in as God, to make you the God of my life as well. And if you're anything like me, you will continue to mess up, you will continue to have questions, you will continue to have doubts, you'll continue to have freakouts, and that's all okay. But the first step is just acknowledging who God is and saying yes to that offer of relationship, and then just saying sorry for messing him around, basically, and rejecting him for however long we have.
Okay, well, thank you. Please join with me in thanking Max Jagannathan.